aim is to bring subject matter experts from across defence, national security and public safety to share their best practice. And today we've got a bit of a treat. So we're talking to the author of Risk Terrain Modelling, founded it, authored books on it, countless journals, TED Talks. So a very good morning to Joel Kaplan, not afternoon for you in the States. So very good morning to you. And I think if we look to get underway, so for the people joining the call that might not know, first time hearing the term, what is risk terrain modeling?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome to everybody who's spending your time with us. Risk Terrain Modeling, or RTM, and we do have it spelled with two L's. So if you search for it, you'll be able to find it in the UK easily. Risk Terrain Modeling is a diagnostic tool. It connects environmental features to crime incident locations. It's a diagnostic tool to help understand crime patterns, to see what types of environments and situations kind of create or aggravate crime risks and the observed crime patterns. And the information from RTM helps you come up with strategies for prevention and service, resource deployment, and a variety of other engagements to address the problems that you're trying to diagnose.
So I guess how did it? I guess how did the concept start and sort of come about? What sort of got the idea underway?
You know, we risk terrain modeling has now been around for about 13 years. Dr. Les Kennedy and I developed it at Rutgers. And one of the first things we realized was there's a wealth of information about crime and crime problems, from practitioner experiences to research and journal publications. And my background is in GIS. I'm trained by some of the experts in GIS and some of the original developers of some of the tools in Esri's products, such as raster modeling. Dana Tomlin, for example, is one of my professors. And so we realize that there's all these tools and resources available to us, but how do we bring them all together and bring disparate sources of data and information together to, synthesize that information in a way that's meaningful and actionable? And what we realized was that geography was the common denominator. And so the insights that we gain from research and the tools and techniques that we have through GIS products and applications give us the ability to bring disparate sources of information together, combine them with geography as their common denominator, and understand what it is about combinations of information at particular places. And ultimately, through that process that we were trying to unravel, we realized that we got really valuable insights. And those insights were the ability to diagnose crime patterns based upon the combination of features at particular locations that create unique settings and environments for crime. That's really how RTM originated, by a desire to better understand crime patterns by bringing together multiple sources of information.
And so we love the idea of using the environment and geography to bring all those layers together to to understand the complexities and the relationships between all the different data sets. And so there's a huge part that spatial analytics plays within that whole process. So why do you think spatial analytics was so important and is so important to policing?
Well, humans operate in space. Our legal activities, our illegal activities, everything we do is, occurs somewhere in space and time. And so it's natural to want to understand how the environment influences our behaviors, because our behaviors are so obviously influenced by the environment. And so, risk train modeling in a way kind of reverse engineers those products of our interactions with places and spaces. And so, spatial analysis is so important, especially in policing, because police use the information they have, the data they have about crime and other related information, to investigate crimes, to analyze crime patterns, to deploy resources in optimal ways. Police operate in space. They analyze crime data and identify hotspots. They deploy to certain places to reduce crime and affect public safety outcomes. And so because we all think and operate in space, it's important to have tools and resources that help us understand those spaces and places in ways that can inform decision making so that we can be optimal in our resource allocation, effective in our deployments, and we know what we did that worked so we can do it again.
And everybody sat listening, I'm sure, will be nodding along, going, "Yeah, that's great." And sometimes that can be rose-tinted glasses, because I guess the first problem is always access to that data, right? And managing that data, and I guess even today is that the size of that data. So how would you overcome that first obstacle when you're looking at something like risk trade modeling, data access, data management? How do you get that foundation data involved in the process early on?
Well, the good thing is with risk trade modeling, we only need 3 data sources and they're all spatial. Esri is built on spatial analysis, the science of where. And so we often have spatial data, particularly those who are listening who use Esri products or GIS on a regular basis. The data that we need for risk trade modeling is similar, and that is, the study area boundary, the polygon shapefile, if you will, the incident location data. This is, locations at the address or XY coordinate, which could be displayed on a map under normal circumstances. Often this is obtained through CAD RMS data or other records. And then the other data that we need for risk trade modeling is place feature data, the addresses or locations of features of the environment that make up the spaces we navigate on a regular basis, business and retail infrastructure, parks, bars, taverns, liquor stores, schools, parks, convenience stores, and so forth. And these data are usually readily available, public record type information, particularly in the US, but increasingly in the UK. You can just Google where's the nearest gas station, and that information comes up on your phone. And the business analyst extension and Esri and various other products have these features combined within them as well. And so these 3 data sets, the study area, the incident level, or what we call topic issue data, or place feature data, are for the most part readily available, if not public record information. And these are the sources we use for risk trade modeling, as well as a variety of other things that we do on a regular basis. So adding RTM to our toolkit is usually easy to get up and running quickly because the data we need for it is readily available.
And once you've got that foundation data set in of kind of the natural environment, your operational data, what makes a good RTM model? What's kind of the lessons we've learned elsewhere?
Well, good data is a good start. We need to trust our data. I mean, to say we need good data is almost cliche these days because we all know that. We all know the garbage in, garbage out metaphor. But the fact of the matter is that data is never going to be perfect. But we need to have data that we can trust. And if we have data that we consider reliable and trustworthy, even if imperfect, then we can qualify or we can limit our expectations of how valuable that data can be. And so if we have data that we trust and that we are confident in its reliability, we can analyze it and then make reasonable decisions based upon that data. That is, our decisions can be data informed. And so what makes a good model? Good data that we can trust to interpret in ways that we can make decisions for actionable deployments of resources or actions that are informed by that data in ways that we can justify. We want our models to help us justify the decisions we make for the resources we deploy, for the crime prevention programs that we implement. That is, a good model offers a level of transparency for the actions that we take in response to those outputs. Another good model is one that invites the human element. We want, people to be involved at various stages of data analysis. No piece of software can replace the value of the human operator in the analytic process. And so a good model is often achieved when we invite feedback from multiple perspectives early on for data vetting, data collection, and various other data inputs, and also when we invite the human element in the outputs of the analysis. That is, to contextualize the results in a way that connects with lived experiences and expectations from people who operate on a daily basis, on the ground, in the field. And so a good model matches those expectations or can connect with those lived experiences. And so a good model is not just getting a result. A good model is being able to trust those results and using them in actionable ways that meet local expectations.
So you touched upon kind of the data foundation, the skills and the tools there. How one of the things that RTM brings into it, and other models have as well in the past, is this idea of continuous improvement as well. What have we done right? What have we done wrong? Hence the question about good models. So how do you make sure that you've got this continuous improvement process in place within RTM?
Yeah, it's a good question. We should always be trying to break things. And one of the things that we've done very early on is we've tried to break RTM. We had an idea. Risk trade modeling came from research. It was never a software product. It was never anything. In fact, it didn't even have a name. We spent a lot of time coming up with names, and some of them were horrible. Risk trade modeling is what we stuck with, and it's lasted until now. But RTM is constantly being improved based upon, practitioner and user feedback. It was the product of a research exercise, but it was adopted by practitioners who use it in the field, realized its value and potential. It's been improved significantly over the past, 12, 13 years. And, to this day, it's now no longer just an analytic technique. It's a way of thinking about the value of spatial data, and what you can do with that information to affect change in transparent and impactful ways. And so it's constantly being improved by the feedback that we get from the people who are using it through independent, randomized controlled trials, to peer-reviewed journal publications, to meta-analyses that are coming out of the UK and elsewhere around the world. That feedback that's made public is incorporated into updates, as well as kind of best practices, which are shared with a variety of other people. And so the only way to ensure improvement is to acknowledge that it's never perfect and there's always room for improvement. And we're always open to the feedback from people who are using it. And that's really how it's grown and evolved over the past, 12, 13 years.
So as you look, as practitioners on this call would look to shorten that feedback loop, so that they can actually improve their decision making and continue to learn. How do you look to automate some of, I guess, the finer details and the processes, within the overall process to make sure that you can shorten that feedback loop?
Yeah. So when risk trade modeling was first developed, it was a process that had 10 steps that we wrote down. We wrote some manuals that explained how to do those 10 steps, and then how to statistically evaluate those results. And, one analysis could take 3 months, but it was based on a process that used off-the-shelf software, access to your university's Esri subscription or Esri license, as well as statistical tools within Esri or other products. But it required, skills that not everybody necessarily had. We then developed a software application which made the process a little bit easier and automated those steps. That was limited to PCs and a desktop installation. Now we have a software as a service, which is available to anybody around the world, and can work on any mobile device regardless of the operating system. And a lot of the research and feedback that we've received has become functions within that software product. The RTMDX software developed at Rutgers originally back in 2012. And so a lot of the lessons that we learn from people, as well as us as ongoing continuous researchers, are built directly into that software to make the tools and functions readily accessible. For example, predictive accuracy index and intersect tools, and things that you practitioners often do or want to do quickly to see how many of this feature type intersects with this high risk location, and how to deploy resources to places that are currently high risk, but also currently hot spots. And we can now do all of those things quickly, and they have become automated within the system. But we also make sure that the analyst owns the results of those products. So you can export those, bring them into Esri, and use the tools and functions that are within Esri's various toolboxes and extensions to do additional analyses and delve in. So automation never stops because there's a variety of tools. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we try to make things readily available to automate processes, but also make it accessible to use tools that are existing and that people are most familiar with, including within Esri's products.
Yeah, and so therefore you must face similar questions that we do. And anytime automation comes up, there's a question of ethics, there's a question of data bias, especially when you're talking sort of targeted policing approaches, which is where this has traditionally been used. So how does RTM kind of answer or respond to the idea of bias within data and that targeted policing approach?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's relevant. It's relevant today. It's always been relevant, but we're talking about it more now. And risk train modeling, first and foremost, is a diagnostic tool. It is not a predictive analytic. It is not AI. It's not machine learning. Each analysis is independent from the previous analyses within your organization, and it's not informed by anyone else's analyses from another organization or another time. And so it is in the moment diagnostic tool for current crime patterns to understand what's going on now to inform decisions for tomorrow. It also focuses on places and not people. So we do not include, census or demographic data or information about individuals. This is not a social network analysis. This is not an analytic tool that focuses on characteristics or qualities of people. It is about places and strictly about places. And also, it's about prevention. We all we all want to be in the right place at the right time. We want to do what we can to help as practitioners. We want to prevent harm, but we also need to understand why things keep happening at the same places over and over again. And we need to know why problems persist in order to prevent them. So when we think about the role of risk train modeling within the larger context of predictive analytics or AI or machine learning or bias, we need to realize that it's a tool that's more about prevention and diagnosing problems to understand what is likely connected to the causes of these problems so that we can fix them. Because if we don't fix the problem, we can be sure it will continue to occur over and over again at the same places we predict. If we diagnose some of the underlying attractors or generators or places that are enabling certain problems to occur over and over again, creating persistent hotspots to emerge, then what we can do is we can focus on prevention. And with a good diagnosis, we can solve problems for the purposes of preventing problems. And only if we are unable to prevent them completely or quickly, then does that diagnosis become something that allows us to anticipate the continued occurrence of problems until we can adequately fix them as we would expect. And so these all connect to kind of the issues around current conversations with regard to bias, but also it increases or opens the door to conversations about transparency and multi-stakeholder collaboration and coordination of existing local resources to address the problems that are diagnosed through the analytic.
I think with any targeted based policing approach, there's always that question around transparency, accountability, and basically community engagement and which communities you are engaging with. So I think risk train modeling does a lot to remove that bias. One of the things we've seen in the UK that is very interesting is the use of risk train modeling to look at where unreported crimes take place. So again, you have areas where certain crime types, particularly, for example, violence against women and girls, for example, those environments have certain characteristics, late time economies, maybe universities, underpasses, bus stops, metro stops, all that kind of thing, that play a role. And actually, there will be areas within towns and cities that have the same or similar characteristic setups, but maybe have little to no crime. So again, that is one that is famously, goes unreported on quite a high level. So it may be that it's just going unreported and the crime is still taking place there. So we've seen an interest in unreported crimes that have those environmental characteristics, whether a crime's taking place elsewhere. And is it just that we're not getting the engagement from the community, we're not getting the reports, we're not getting the incidents actually being raised, and therefore we can't actually address the problems in those areas? So we've seen a really good interesting shift in unreported crime to risk terrain modelling. Have you seen anything like that in work you've done in, with your customer base and with the institutions you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of police agencies will talk about feeling like they're playing whack-a-mole. They'll pounce on a hot spot, they'll have some success, they'll pop up somewhere else. So this introduces the idea of displacement. So we can talk about, addressing current crime problems and having them displaced somewhere else, and then trying to suppress them over there, and possibly they return to their original location. But when we diagnose the environments where the current hotspots exist, or where the crimes are likely to displace if they are ultimately unprevented completely, then it opens the door to the idea of vulnerable locations. That is, when we diagnose existing crime patterns, we identify other places that have similar qualities that make them vulnerable to similar types of crimes. And so displacement is not likely to just go around the corner, it's likely to go to the next best option. And when we identify vulnerable locations for crime through the RTM analysis, we are identifying places that could, in fact, have underreported crimes, which could focus our attention on these places. They could, if they are similarly vulnerable, but crime is not yet occurring there, we don't need to wait for displacement. We can actually deploy resources there and try to mitigate the vulnerabilities. And we might find that there are crimes that are going unreported there, or we might find that we can do something relatively easily to not only prevent displacement, but to prevent the emergence and then persistence of crime, because these places can be mitigated by managing the risks that are identified through our diagnostic and analytic. The other piece to this is spatial justice. The equitable distribution of resources to places that have not only existing crime problems, but other locations that have vulnerabilities for crime to emerge or persist. This is that is, we can identify high risk locations in lower crime areas, as well as lower risk places in higher crime areas, and deploy resources accordingly, and in many ways more equitably, which also connects to the idea of transparency, but it allows us to explain why we're doing what we're doing with the resources that we have.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and like it's obviously born out of academia, and it's a principle that's been applied, software and tooling developed. Where you might be able to name a few, but where's a good example? So if somebody's on the call and thinking we'd love to see, or to reach out to another agency to understand where it's been done successfully in practice, where have you got any examples that you can provide?
There are several in the UK that I do not believe have made themselves known publicly. So until they do, I'm not going to out them. But they are doing some amazing work in multiple jurisdictions across the UK. I do hope to be able to speak about them soon. In the US, there are several peer-reviewed journal publications. Most recently, in Kansas City, Missouri, there's a publication which I'm happy to share with you if you'd like to forward it to others. There's an open source, open access version of it for those who would like to read it. And it actually goes through in detail kind of their playbook for how they've implemented RTM within a policing framework for what they call risk-based policing. That article is actually what was used in one of the jurisdictions that replicated their work in the UK, and is now working on documenting that. So hopefully they'll be able to do that shortly. Atlantic City is another example where there's some articles about Atlantic City and some videos that I can share with some links as well. But check out Atlantic City Risk Terrain Modeling or Kansas City, Missouri risk terrain modeling or risk-based policing, and they should come up kind of first thing on those searches. And those are some really good examples. In Dallas, Texas, the risk terrain modeling has been used outside of the police agency. It's actually been used by a nonprofit organization in partnership with a city department focused on non-law enforcement or non-law enforcement resource allocation to address issues that connect with crime and public safety, such as vacant lots and abandoned buildings and lighting and various other features of the environment that have been shown to connect with crime problems through their diagnoses.
That's very interesting. So is that where you see the sort of the growth, or where you see risk terrain modeling evolving? That it isn't, traditionally it's been a policing tool. That actually, is it much more than that?
It is. Risk terrain modeling has always evolved as an analytic technique, and now it's become much more of a way of thinking about crime problems and addressing them. When used within a police agency for police purposes and police resource allocation, it's referred to as risk-based policing. When risk terrain modeling is used or spearheaded by agencies or organizations outside of police departments, we often refer to it as data-informed community engagement. The Newark Public Safety Collaborative in the city of Newark, which is a collaborative housed out of Rutgers University, demonstrates the way in which RTM can be used to bring multiple stakeholders together to have conversations about the results of the analysis and about how everybody there can do something, even if a little bit, based upon their unique missions for their organizations at places that need them most. And when all these independent agencies or organizations or community groups do a little bit in the places that need the most, it becomes a comprehensive intervention strategy for the city as a whole. And the Newark Public Safety Collaborative is a good example of that.
So I guess one of the key bits to that is, obviously there's the data sharing amongst the organizations, but I guess also it's the dissemination of that information. So actually taking it from data to some actionable information that other agencies can engage on the cause rather than the effect of. So how have you seen the practice of disseminating that information across multiple organizations?
The best examples I've seen have been the ones I have not done. It's the ones that the analysts in police agencies or the analysts within the nonprofit organizations or city agencies that are using the systems, that are using the RTM analysis, they're creating these templates. They're getting very innovative about the products and reports that they deliver because they know who their audience is and they tailor them to their audience. Sometimes they have tables and charts, sometimes they're just text, sometimes they have maps, and sometimes they just have addresses of the places they want people to focus because they've already used the GIS products to do the intersections, and they don't care about the maps, they just care about the results of those intersection tools. And so they're very creative in how they're sharing this information with their constituents, not only to deploy resources within their organization or to share across organizations to deploy complementary resources, but also to share the information with community members to add a level of transparency so that they understand what's being done, why it's being done, where it's being done, and how. And so when the interventions or actions are taken, they meet community expectations. So they're using the data and the information produced from the analytics, as well as the tools within Esri and GIS products to produce information that sets a level of community expectations so that when they deploy their resources, they can meet or exceed those levels of expectation.
So as we're sort of approaching the end of the sort of final bits of the session, as I've done with traditional and some of the previous webinars I've gone through, what are the 3 things you would say to a practitioner on the call that maybe isn't engaged in risk terrain modeling now that would help them succeed with delivering risk terrain modeling into their organization?
Well, if you have not been introduced to RTM previously, hopefully this gives you a sense of why RTM can be valuable as an analytic tool, something to add to your toolkit. Um, I would suggest starting with not the analytic tool, but what you want to achieve with the tools that you have, all of the tools that you have in your toolkit, and how can RTM be another tool added to that toolkit to help you achieve that vision? You know, is it because you want to do better analyses? Is it because you want to maximize existing local resources? Is it because you want to change the way in which you're engaging with the public as a police agency and you want to be more community engaged or community focused? Is it simply because you want to save money? And because we know RTM reduces crime, then every crime prevented is dollars saved. Or maybe there's other types of returns on investment with regard to cost benefit analysis. Maybe you want to use it to develop intervention strategies, and it's a decision-making tool that informs conversations about strategies for crime prevention programming, either in the short term or long term. But um, I would think about what your goal is, what your vision is for the outputs, how you're going to use the outputs, and then find the tools and resources that are going to help deliver actionable information to help you achieve that vision.
And if somebody is doing risk terrain modeling now, slightly different variation, but the same question, if you are doing it, what could take it from good to great, do you think?
Yeah, well, start big or start small or kind of go big is so kind of ask yourself, where are you on that spectrum? If right now you're only using it as an analytic tool and you're getting results, and then you're incorporating those results into existing information products, then maybe the next step is to um, not just present tables and maps, but to have conversations about risk narratives. That is the way in which the features of the environment connect with behaviors at and around those places. For example, if the results are showing that it's petrol stations and bus stops and highway on-ramps that are connected with robbery, then you might ask yourself, why is it these things? Is it people are waiting too long for the bus? They're robbing people for their car keys to steal the car while it's being filled up at the petrol station, and then they're doing this only at gas stations near bus stops next to highway on-ramps because it's an easy getaway? Or is it, obviously that was a made-up example, but as we better understand the context of the outputs, that's an excellent next step if you're not doing that, and that's called risk narratives. So forming risk narratives from the outputs. And then if you're already doing that, thinking about how you can mitigate those risk narratives using resources that you already have, whether it's deploying police resources or doing business checks or engaging with the community at high-risk locations with the resources within your organization. And if you're already doing that, then take it outside your organization. How can you produce information that you can share with other agencies, other community groups, or other police or law enforcement agencies to give them information that allows them to deploy their resources to the places that need them most to do what they do best. And so there's a lot of things that you can do to improve. And if you're already doing that, then I would say collect information, figure out ways in which you can turn the results from your successes with all of this into having conversations about the real value that data has, and improve the data you're collecting and the programs and processes for data collection to have better data, which brings us right back to the first question you asked, which is, what do you need for a good model, and how does data connect with it? And sometimes you need to prove that the data has value. And when you have success with these analytic outputs, don't forget to take the opportunity to demonstrate how it could be even better if we had better data, and use that as a conversation about how you could begin collecting better data for the next step.
And continue with that continuous improvement within your organization. So it's a fantastic insight into what risk terrain modeling is, what it can do for each of these organizations, agencies. I've got notes from understanding the output to then defining your toolkit through to understanding your risk narrative. Take it outside the organization if you've done those things, share it with your partner agencies. put in a multi-agency approach to intervention and prevention. And that improving data collection was the last point there, and that's fantastic. And if people on the call wanted to reach out, the best way of getting in contact with yourself, Joel, I think we're going to share an email afterwards, but I don't know if you want to sort of just mention it now while we're on the webinar session.
Yeah, absolutely. All of my contact information is at jkaplan.com. But of course, my email address is jkaplan@rutgers.edu. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has as a follow-up.
That's fantastic. And from Esri UK, obviously, we're here to help with, joining you up with Joel, helping with any of the problems that you've got, and helping you provide a solution and access to that data across your organisation. So I'd like to thank everybody for their time today. There'll be a recording sent out afterwards as well to share with other people within your organisations. And I hope you all have a very good day.
Thank you so much.
Joel.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks all.